Hello everyone, my name is Arijit and today I'm going to give you an overview of Informatica PowerCenter. So before starting, let me introduce myself. I have around 11 plus years of experience in IT industry and majorly worked in Informatica, database and reporting. So without wasting much time, let's start with the agenda for today. So today we are going to cover what is business intelligence. Then we'll go for ETL. So we are very familiar with this term ETL. Today we'll discuss about ETL and how the ETL will make the business more flexible and smooth. Okay. Then definitely we have to go through the business, how the business looks today and what are the challenges they are facing on daily when they are running the business on daily basis, right? So those are the things that we'll cover. Then why only Informatica? There are multiple tools in the market. So what are the benefits and drawbacks of Informatica that we'll discuss. Next we'll cover what are the Informatica PowerCenter components, the objects on PowerCenter, what is node, then we'll go through the data flow diagram, then stages of Informatica load, then we'll cover the transformation and different types of transformations. So let's start with the data intelligence. So what is data intelligence? Data intelligence is a system to deliver trustworthy and reliable data. It includes the intelligence about data or metadata. So this data intelligence actually gives us the answer for a couple of questions that is very important for a business. What are they? First is who is using the data? Okay, and who is using what data? That is also very important for the users. Next comes where is the data and where did it come from? So we have to know the source of the data because data may be coming from different sources, right? We should be aware of the source of the data before consuming the data and whether that is reliable or not. The third question is when the data is being accessed and what was the last update. So we have to always make sure that the data that we are consuming should be the update one or the latest data so that we don't miss any recent changes on the data, right? That is very vital. Then comes why do you have the data and why do we need to keep the data or discard the data. Next is how the data is being used and how should the data be used. So definitely it's not only the gathering the data or getting the data, it's more how we are using the data, how we are utilizing the data into uh, in the future, right? So those are the very important part because data is the thing that is very vital for any business. Then the last question is the relationship. So what relationships are inherent within the data and the data consumer? So if you're consuming something which is not related to the business and will not give any uh, plus point or positive points to the business, there is no use of the data, right? So there should be a relationship between the data that we are getting and the consumer of the data. So the whole architecture, the whole process of uh, all getting the data, loading, transforming, and then reusing or utilizing the data into for the consumer is called data intelligence. Now comes ETL. So what is ETL? We are all aware of this now, right? ETL is extract, transform, and load. So it defines the it from defines the process of extraction, transform, and then loading the data from different heterogeneous data sources. It may not be a homogeneous source, but it can be a different type of. It can be a database, it can be a flat file, it can be COBOL file, whatever be it. So data from different sources, okay, are being transformed and loaded into a centralized system or commonly it may be more than one, but majorly it's one data source, right? So the tool or the process that actually loads the data into a centralized system from different sources based on the business need is called ETL. Okay. Now we will discuss what are the challenges that business looks today. The major challenge is the performance, right? So the performance and the quality, these are the major challenges for business, right? The data that we're consuming, that should be with quality, right? If the quality of the data is not good and it is not used for the business, so there is no need of getting those data. And also the data need to be present on time. So the performance, the quality, and handling all the business requirement should be the primary. So these are the challenges that current business faces, right? Along with that, we have maintenance, versioning of data, then security, the cost of server, the resource and support. Right, we have to, the business has to consider about the costing. They have to make sure the data is correct, and the security of data, which is very important, is also maintained. Along with that, what challenges we have is the organization now is trying to make themselves much more operational with easy to interactive data. Okay, now data is more important part of the organization. So we all are aware of this, right? This data is like business for them. Now data is the backbone of a report, and reports are the baseline on which all the vital management decisions are being taken. Data coexist in different, maybe heterogeneous data sources. So the data that we get is being used to make very vital decisions. So the data needs to be correct, up to date, secure, and with quality, right? All these things has to be maintained, which is the major challenge for business today. Then why Informatica? There are multiple tools like in the market. Why we majorly use Informatica? The major reason is, you can see, if you see the magic quadrant, right, which is the metrics for understanding the performance of different tools and the demand in the market. You can see Informatica is the major here, which is the leader, market leader currently. Now, why? Because Informatica is leading vendor in enterprise data intelligence. It has enterprise data integration, it makes the data governance, data migration, data quality, synchronization of data, and data warehousing. Right. So all these things are being taken care of with a single tool, which is Informatica. Other than that, but that can also be achieved by any other tools, right? Then why Informatica? There are three major reasons. One is performance, second is versioning and source control, third is quality. What is performance? So the feature in Informatica is it can deal with partition table efficiently. So that means the performance, that whatever I mentioned, that data must be available within time. So how that can be achieved? By Informatica, because Informatica actually, it has a logic or a concept called partition. So suppose you have a huge volume of data, if you are dealing with a huge table, and the processing of the table will be definitely huge. So how Informatica gives us advantages when there are multiple or huge volume of data to be processed. It actually can partition the table logically when it processes. So suppose you have 100 million of record in a particular table, and you have partitioned the table logically into 10 different partitions. That means those 100 millions are segregated into 10 millions each, and it will process the record parallelly. So that will actually 1/10 of the timing will be taken to process the data. It has to it also helps in bulk extract and loading. That means it can load the data at one go. A huge volume of data can be processed. It also helps to disable triggers. It can help in generating ID. Suppose you have, why it is very important generating ID. Suppose you have different source system, and all the source system has their own ID. Okay, but those ID are based on their source system. Maybe source A and source B having ID 1, but they are generated based on their respective source system and cannot be same as uh, when we are loading into a target table from both A and B, they cannot be same. So to distinguish between them, what Informatica can do is it can generate its own ID, and that can be used to identify the record separately. Then we have parallel processing as I mentioned. So that will help how the performance can be improved. Now it comes to versioning and control. So it has version control in Informatica, which helps actually developer can control and change over source code and can maintain the multiple copy of source code and can keep them a level. So what will happen? Suppose today we have some logic. Okay, business has some logic. Now tomorrow, business come up with different logic, and we develop a separate. We make the change in the mapping. So what will happen? The new set of code will be generated. Okay, but we are not going to lose the previous version of the data. We are not going to lose the previous version of the mapping or logic. Whenever we need, suppose after some day, it come to know the business come to know that the new logic is not as expected. We should use the previous logic, and we need not to go back and create a new mapping. Rather, we can go to the version, and we can just use the previous. We can take the copy from the version and use it. It's that simple. So that makes Informatica actually user friendly. Also, it maintains the data quality. How can it assure the data quality? It has a completeness. Data is not missed anyway, okay, during the process of data. So all the data which is coming from the source will be processed as expected, and none of them will be missed out. It maintains completeness, it maintains comfortability, consistency, accuracy, and integrity. That's how Informatica actually helps data and business to grow without any worries. Okay, that's why it's number one. Now, let's discuss of the components of the Informatica PowerCenter. So, the major components are repository manager, administrator console, designer, workflow manager, and workflow monitor. So, we'll get into those details of different components, but I can just give you an overview. Like repository manager actually it contains the connection, folder, object, and user and group. Those details. So whatever object we create, right, that are maintained in the repository manager. Then comes the administrator console, which is a web-based. And what it does, it actually creates and configures the node. So we'll get into the details of the node in later slides. It helps to upgrade or delete the connection and start and stop of the application. We have integration services which actually runs the Informatica, right? So those all this administrative job that is very important for any tool to run, and configuration detail. Those details are being maintained in administrator console. Then comes your designer. Designer is a part where we actually create the ETL mapping. And once the mapping is created, we need to run it, right? So we go into the Power Workflow Manager where we create and start the workflow. And we can provide the connection details and everything there. Next comes your Workflow Monitor. Workflow Monitor is actually kind of UI where you can see the status of the job. So suppose you have created one workflow and you have triggered the workflow, then you have to get into a monitor to check whether it is success or fail. Okay, next discuss about the PowerCenter objects. So the main object is your repository. The repository is kind of heart of Informatica PowerCenter. Okay, so what it is actually is it's a repository is a container of information about all the objects and activities done within the tool. So in the previous slide, you can see we have a repository manager, right? So it as, and we have already discussed, it contains folder, object, connection, everything. So whatever components or objects we create in Informatica, right, those are handled and stored in repository. Now, repository can be of several types. It can be standalone repository, it can be global repository, can be local and version repository. Now, standalone repository is a repository which functions individually and that is unrelated to any other repository. It is the name signifies, right? It does not have any relation or connection with any other repository. Then comes our global repository. What is global repository? Global repository is the hub of domain. The use of global repository is to store common objects that multiple developers can use through shortcut. This object may include operational or application source definition, such as reusable transformation, maplet, and mapping. Like we have one object or mapping, okay, some source target, which can be used across the globe or across the projects, uh, and which is majorly reusable components, right? So those kind of objects are stored in global repository. Now, what is local repository? Local repository is within a domain that is not the global repository. The use of local repository is for development mostly. Okay, from a local repository, you can create shortcut to object in shared folder in the global repository. These objects typically include source definition, common objects, dimension lookup, interface standard transformation. You can also create a copy of object in the non-shared folder. So it's kind of uh, I would say a shortcut. So the shortcuts and those things are majorly stored into local repository. And then comes the version repository. So version repository is the repository which can store multiple copy or version of the object. Like as I mentioned, like suppose we have a business requirement and the business requirement is changed at the later point of time. So we want to revert back to the previous version of the object or mapping. So we can achieve that within a version repository. And each version is a separate object with a unique property. Okay. Okay. So let's come the configuration of repository. How we can configure the repository. So these are the very basic simple steps that we can follow. So what you need to do, you need to go to repository first and need to create the repository. Once you click the add repository, you need to give a name to the repository in the section. Okay. Then you have to provide your username. So the repository cannot be created from here in our repository manager, but can be created in our uh, this section, administration console. Okay, this administration console actually creates the repository. What you need to do, once the repository is created, you need to come into the designer or the manager where you want to connect to the repository, and click on add repository, provide the name of the repository and the username. Once you click it, it will ask to configure the domain. So what you need to do, you need to give the domain name, the gateway and the port. So once you give that domain name and port, it will show you all the repository available for the particular domain. So let's, for example, we have in our protection domain, we have this many repository. So then we can select whichever repository you want to connect and click OK. So it will ask for you user ID and password, and once you provide that, you will be able to connect and see all the components or folders that you created under that repository. Now let's discuss about Node. What is Node? But in order to understand Node, you have to first understand what is domain. So what is domain is? A domain is a primary unit for management and administration of services in PowerCenter. A domain contains the following component, which is one or more node. Now the node is a logical representation of machine in a domain. So as I mentioned in the previous screen, right? So once you provide the details in a domain, under that domain we have multiple repositories. So and under the domain we have multiple nodes. How the node works? Suppose you have a domain, under that you have three different nodes. So there are two kind of nodes. Okay, one is your gateway node and another is your worker node. The gateway node uh, actually can run the management service for the domain, and they are also the one which communicate with the domain database. So they are in if suppose under your domain you have three separate nodes, okay, and all the three separate nodes have their own service manager, have their own application service, but uh, out of this three node, only one of them can be a gateway node, and rest of them will be a worker node. And this gateway node has the privilege to connect with your management services. Okay, but suppose why then the question comes, right? Then why we need all the three different nodes if only one node can connect and rest of the node cannot? Because it actually uses for uh, when there is any down in one of the nodes. Suppose node 1 is working as a gateway node currently, okay, and sometime after some day the node 1 has actually got down due to some reason. So what will happen? Node 2 or node 3 will take the charge of a gateway node, and node 3 will become a gateway node, and node 3 will become gateway node, and node 2 will be the worker node. And once the node 1 is come online, what will happen? Node 1 will again become a gateway node, and rest of the two worker node will become as it is. Okay, so what does that mean is that you will not miss any so the system is actually not down at any point of time, because one or the other node will definitely take as a gateway node and make the system available. So that is the main benefit of Informatica and nodes, and that is why it is very important. Now let me go through the data flow diagram of Informatica. So we have three or four major components, which is a repository, designer, workflow, and monitor. Why I say three? Because the major of the components are being worked on this first three, and monitor is for just monitoring the job. So the repository components are being considered and stored in workflow repository. Designer actually what it does, once we create the mapping and all, then what it does, it connects with the source. So it gives the um, connection detail and everything. When we provide the details in designer, it connects to the source and it fetches the data from the source. Okay, so and what it does, based on the performance of integration surveys, the domain actually connects to the different components, and with the help of repository service, what it does, it extracts the data from source, transform them, and then load into target. So these are the full diagram of how Informatica actually loads the data. Then comes, let's discuss about the stages of Informatica load. So what are the stages? Suppose we know the source, we know the target. So how Informatica actually loads? What are the stages it gone through? Okay, so the first part is the designer. So what it does, it loads and joins the source data, then it cleans the data and design the mapping. Okay, then comes the workflow manager. What it actually does, so it actually creates the workflow, it configures the session property where you can provide your connection details, your target and source, and then you can start the execution of the workflow. And then comes the monitor. Monitor is just to verify the execution of the workflow, and it helps to see the log of the execution and also how many records got processed. So it helps us to verify the data. Then comes the data visualization. So it helps to load the output data from your data warehouse and generate a graphical representation of the data. But this section will not cover here because this is actually the uh, after section of data load. Then comes the major part, which is transformation. So we've been hearing, right? It's extraction, transform, and load. So how the transformation is done? What is transformation? So transformation are repository objects which actually can read, modify, and pass the data to the defined target structure like table, file, or any other target. Okay, so it actually helps to implement the business logic and transform or clean the data in a required format that the target or the consumer is expecting. So a transformation is basically used to represent a set of rules which defines the data flow and how the data is loaded into the target. In Informatica, the purpose of transformation is to modify the source data according to the requirement of the target system. It also ensures the quality of the data being loaded into the target. Okay. Now, what are the type of transformation? So there are majorly four type of transformation. One is active transformation, passive transformation, connected transformation, and unconnected transformation. So what is active transformation? An active transformation can change the number of rows that pass through the transformation. What does that mean? Suppose you have 50 records coming from your source, okay, on a particular day, and out of those 50 records, only 10 records actually satisfies your business need and can be loaded into your target. That means the number of records which is coming from the source is actually got reduced before loading into your target. And and you have applied suppose a filter transformation to reduce, or you have applied maybe a router or something that actually helps us to identify the expected record. So those transformation will be called active transformation. So example here is the filter transformation because it removes the row that do not meet the filter condition. So passive transformation is definitely the opposite of active transformation. What it does is it does not change the number of rows that pass through the transformation. For example, expression transformation. What it performs, it calculations on individual row and data. So suppose you have uh, your first name, last name, and your salary. Okay, what and you want to what you want to do? You want to add a percentage uh, of the salary as a bonus. Okay, so what you will do, you will process all the records from the source and you will calculate the bonus and it will load into a target. You are not losing any record, you are processing each and every record. So that's why expression is a passive transformation. Now we have connected transformation and unconnected transformation. So what is connected transformation? It receives input values directly from mapping pipeline. So what does it mean? So it means you have a mapping, right? You have source, you have target, you have transformation in between. So disconnected transformation is the transformation which is connected with your source, target, and other. If any transformation is available, those are connected by a pipeline, like your connected lookup or any other transformation. Okay. Then comes your unconnected transformation. Unconnected transformation is the one which does not have any pipeline but is being used to look up the expression or another transformation, right? An example is unconnected lookup transformation. So you have an expression which is being used to call the lookup transformation and to get a return value, but it's nowhere connected into the pipeline of the flow. So these are the major four types of transformation that are used in your Informatica. Okay. So these are the things that we want to cover for day one. Hope you enjoyed, and please let us know if you want to